From July 1967 until July of 1969, Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, towns located in Washtenaw County, Michigan, were terrorized by a man dubbed the Ypsilanti Ripper, the Michigan Murderer, and the Co-Ed Killer. On July 9, 1967, Mary Flezer, a 19-year-old Eastern Michigan University student, was last seen as she walked to her Ypsilanti apartment. Her badly decomposed body was later discovered August 7th at an abandoned farm in Superior Township. Autopsy reports show that she had been severely beaten and stabbed almost 30 times in the chest and abdomen. Evidence also showed the body had been moved 3 times in the month leading up to her discovery. As police began their investigation, a neighbor of Mary came forward, stating they had seen Mary walking when a man driving a blue-gray Chevy pulled up alongside Mary twice. Both times Mary shook her head no and continued to walk. That was the last time she was seen alive. Oddly, 2 days after the discovery of Mary's body, a man arrived at the funeral home claiming to be a family friend and wanting to photograph Mary for the family. He was denied access to Mary's remains. He was described as, quote, a handsome young white man driving a blue-gray Chevy. He had not been carrying a camera. For almost a year, no further leads arose and the case went cold. Then, on July 5, 1968, construction workers in the neighboring city of Ann Arbor found a decomposing body later identified as Joan Schell. Joan was last seen June 30th by her roommate Susan Colby. Susan and Joan waited at a bus stop on Washtenaw Avenue in Ypsilanti. As Susan waited with Joan, a red and black Pontiac Bonneville, driven by a man described as around 20, clean-cut, with dark-sided parted hair, asked if she would like a ride. Against Susan's advice, Joan accepted the ride. Joan told Susan she would call her when she arrived at her boyfriend's apartment. After 3 hours of no contact, Susan reported Joan missing. Joan's autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted and stabbed 25 times with a 4-inch blade. She was attacked so aggressively she had punctured lungs, liver, and a fracture to her skull. Susan was able to give a description of the man driving the car, and a composite drawing was done. Authorities investigated 150 registered owners of red and black Pontiac Bonnevilles, and a $7,800 reward was offered after all leads had been exhausted, and the case became stagnant. 2 months after the murder, eyewitnesses claim to see Joan walking with a man who matched the composite drawing description. No arrest was made. Months later, on March 20th, 1969, Jane Mixer, a 20-year-old University of Michigan student, disappeared. Jane had been seeking a ride to her hometown of Muskin. She was later found atop a grave at the Denton Cemetery in Van Buren Township. Autopsy revealed that she had been shot twice in the head with a .22 caliber pistol in the early hours of March 21st. Just 4 days later, another body was found in a vacant home on Earhart Road, just a few hundred yards from the location of Joan Schell's body. Authorities noted a significant increase in aggression and savagery. The mutilated body had intense trauma covering her skull and one side of her face. She had been tied down, savagely beaten with a leather belt. Her shirt had been stuffed in her mouth to muffle her screams, as she received extensive blunt force trauma to her head, face, and body. She even had a branch from a nearby tree inserted 8 inches inside of her. The crime scene indicated she had attempted to escape. This poor soul was identified as Marilyn Skeleton, a 16-year-old high school student. She was last seen on Washtenaw Avenue hitchhiking to Ann Arbor. On April 16th, the remains of 13-year-old Dawn Basom were found located on a desolate road in Ypsilanti. She had been stabbed in her chest and genitals, suffered slash marks on her breast, butt, and stomach. A handkerchief was stuffed into her mouth, and she had been strangled. Basom was last seen the night before as she walked home with friend Earl Kidd. Earl stated they parted ways once they reached the road. An eyewitness claimed to see Dawn walking down the road around 7:35. She was not seen alive again. Located about 100 yards from where Dawn Basom was found was an abandoned farmhouse. When the house was searched, authorities found bloodstains, broken glass, and the same electrical flex used to strangle Dawn. Authorities believed this is the location Dawn lost her life. A week later, investigators returned to the home to further their search. This time, authorities found a piece of Dawn's shirt and an earring belonging to Marilyn Skeleton, confirming the Michigan murders were linked to the same person. On May 13th, the abandoned farmhouse was mysteriously burned down. After the flames had been extinguished, 5 lilacs were found in a row on the driveway, a clear representation of the murder victims. By this time, fear had set in for the people of Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. The killings seemed to become more frequent, and many victims were students of University of Michigan and Eastern Michigan University. People speculated it was a fellow student committing these horrible crimes. Female students began to arm themselves with knives and traveled in groups of 3 or more, or with a trusted male. Curfews were put into place, and over 800 tips were received, and more than 1,000 sex offenders were investigated and cleared. A Dutch psychic named Peter Horrocks traveled to Michigan to assist in the investigation. Horrocks predicted the killer was a strong male, under 25 years old, born outside of the U.S., and rode a motorcycle. He stated the killer would strike again soon, and this would be his final kill. Sadly, on July 23, 1969, Karen Feynman, an 18-year-old Eastern Michigan University student, was reported missing after she failed to return to her dorm. Her last known sighting was around noon in a wig shop located downtown. Her nude body was discovered 3 days later alongside Huron River Parkway. Just as the others, she had been beaten and had a severe skull and brain injury. She had been forced to swallow a caustic substance. A caustic substance is a corrosive substance that will damage or destroy what it comes in contact with by means of chemical reaction. Her neck, shoulder, and breast had all been burned with the same chemical. She had been sexually assaulted and a cloth shoved into her mouth. Her underwear had also been forced inside of her. The underwear contained semen and hair clippings that did not belong to the victim. With growing outcries from the community, investigators decided to do a media blackout. Knowing the killer had returned to the previous crime scenes, they hoped he would do it again. In place of Karen's body, police left a mannequin and waited. Early the next morning, under heavy rain, a police officer observed a man running away from the direction of the mannequin and attempted to radio the sighting in. The heavy rain interfered and no contact was made. The man was not caught. Investigators retraced the steps of Karen in hopes to find a lead. The owner of the rig store, Diana Gosh, remembers Karen being in the store. Karen mentioned she had accepted a ride from a stranger who was waiting outside. Diana described him as a young man with brown hair driving a motorcycle. The Ypsilanti Ripper's reign of terror finally came to an end when a patrolman named Larry Mathewson heard the description of the suspect and believed he knew the identity of the killer. A man he saw riding a Triumph Bonneville motorcycle around Eastern Michigan University on July 23rd. The suspect description matched a man by the name John Collins. John Collins was born in Canada, a motorcycle enthusiast, and was attending Eastern Michigan University, majoring in elementary education. When a picture of John Collins was shown to the owner of the wig shop, she confirmed he was the man she saw Karen ride away with. Collins had in fact been interviewed and cleared by police early in the investigation. With a positive ID from an eyewitness, on July 27th, Collins was arrested in his apartment on Emmett Street in Ypsilanti. Investigators learned that Collins had used the basement of his uncle to carry out at least one of his horrendous murders. His uncle was out of town at the time of the killing. Blood and hair was found in the basement, and it matched the same blood type as Karen Feynman. Because this was the 60s, DNA evidence was nowhere near as advanced as today, and this was the only DNA evidence investigators had. Collins was only officially charged with one murder, and no other DNA evidence could link him to the other victims. John is also suspected of several other murders, including one in Salinas, California. Investigators in California believed it was John due to the similarities of the murders. No direct evidence could link him to the crime. Another suspected victim is Alice Colomb, a recent University of Michigan graduate who had been killed June 7, 1969. She had been shot once in the head, stabbed twice in the chest, and sexually assaulted. On August 19, 1970, John Collins was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. John and his family maintain his innocence. John is currently serving his sentence at G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility in Jackson County, Michigan. Justice has been served for Karen, but what about the remaining victims? Was John responsible for the demise of all of these women? Could he have more victims that are not linked to him? Why did John commit these awful crimes? I do hope the families of the victims have the closure they deserve.